Thanks for joining us. We're really happy to share with you what's going on in and around the Arapaho-Roosevelt from the perspective of 5 collaborative groups. And we happen to, this guy, the forest supervisor for the Arapaho-Roosevelt was passing through, and we thought it'd be helpful to include him as well. Katie is here now. Katie, nothing has happened yet if you want to still give your spiel.
Awesome. Sorry, everybody. My internet went out and I rushed to my public library as quickly as I possibly could. So yeah, mostly my updates, just a couple of things about the Forest Collaboratives Network. First of all, we have our Colorado Forest Collaborative Summit is coming up on September 6th to 8th in Salida. Our planning team has been rounding up a really cool speaker lineup, and we have funding available for travel support for place-based forest collaboratives if you are finding yourself in need of a way to get there. And then also we've got a whole series of these branching out calls. So I'll put a link in the chat to where you can learn all about our upcoming ones. You do have to register for each one separately, so make sure that you do that. Yes, and then we have a Google Drive that I'll also put a link for in the chat where we track all the follow-ups from every single one of these calls. So I'll post a link to introduce yourself in our running attendance sheet. That is that link, and then I'll share all the other links afterwards. So that's about all from me. Oh, one other very important thing is today is our awesome interns Holly's last day. So everyone give her some love before you leave. I threw a curveball on her last day of having her start this meeting without me.
Thanks, Katie.
Yeah, so with that, I'll pass it over to our speakers. We're super excited to have all of you, and thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today.
Yeah, I think we're going to let Monte kind of set it up for a few minutes here on the Arapaho-Roosevelt and their view on working with collaboratives. You want to kick it off a little bit, Monte?
Sure. I got a couple things I'll try to cover real quick, and those of you that know me, I've probably got 20 minutes worth of stuff I'm going to try to shove into 5, so we'll see how well I do. But hi, I'm Monte Williams. I'm the forest supervisor on the Arapaho-Roosevelt National Forest and Pawnee National Grassland. I'm going to talk a little bit about some thoughts on working with collaborators in northern Colorado. Where I want to start, and this will maybe sound strange, but kind of in a spaces of what the Forest Service does and how local voices play into that, because a lot of times I think we assume, and it may not be what we really think. And so the mission of the Forest Service is to sustain the health and diversity and productivity of the national forests and grasslands to meet the needs of present and future generations. And first, important to catch in there, that's all forests. It's not just national forest system land. So we as part of our mission have an interest in all of the national forests in the United States. Secondly, that health, diversity, and productivity thing. If you're on this call, you probably recognize that the wildfire crisis, the climate changes that we're seeing, hottest year in recorded history, I don't know, it's putting all that at risk. And so we are really interested in this stuff. And then there's a kind of a question around, well, whose needs are we really concerned with? You know, who are these present and future generations? Is it just northern Colorado where my forest is at? Is it the nation as a whole? And who cares what northern Colorado thinks? And the truth is it's kind of both. And so, you know, as you're thinking about working with the Forest Service or a federal entity, the first piece is that Congress makes laws, and those laws and the policy that derives from that basically are that kind of national expectation of what the nation is looking for from us. But there's some wiggle room in this space, and so we need to balance those national kind of desires with the local needs and desires as well. And what's interesting is any federal and any Forest Service forest supervisor, district ranger that you might run across has a variety of ways to learn what that is and make decisions based on that. It could be just comments on a NEPA document. It could be relationships just with local politicians or agencies. It could be public meetings. But it could be working collaboratively with organizations within the community. And I think that's a really important thing to think about as we kind of talk about this. Another thing I want to talk a little bit about is St. Vrain. You'll hear about some of that today, but you'll hear a lot of other examples. But I think it's a good one to illustrate maybe some of the benefits we see out of that. And first is it's a great example of where we share decision space with the community. We worked hand in hand with the community connected partner, the Watershed Center, to develop a vision and the proposed action. And the Watershed Center led this effort. They brought the community together early on. They worked together. They brought in the best available science to help guide the process. And in a more traditional Forest Service decision, interaction with the community would come very late in the process. A proposed action in order to be signed or out there, and we'd be asking people for comments on what you think. And I used to hear Forest Service has already made its mind up by the time it gets to that point. So why even do anything other than maybe sue us or appeal or nowadays file an objection? People felt unheard. They didn't see their concerns addressed. And I think the St. Vrain process really is an example of how that's changing in Northern Colorado. The work was done long before the proposed action was there. Community members were able to speak and be a part of and help shape that proposed action that we eventually analyzed. As I said earlier, there's kind of laws and things that kind of drive what we can and can't do as line officers. And so once we're at that proposed action state and we're in NEPA, I really have my hands tied. But before that, we have all the room in the world to work with people about ideas and where we think things should go. It's important to note that St. Vrain group actually that developed a proposed action and brought it to the Forest Service. We have analyzed that and actually already issued a draft decision, which is amazing. So a couple of thoughts on how you can start if you're wanting to engage the Forest Service and they haven't come out and sought you out. One of the first things that I ask people is, are you going to be able to trust people that have burned you in the past? Is the person that's representing your organization somebody that anytime you mention the local line officer turns red in the face and starts spitting on the floor? Might not be the best person to start having this interaction. Let's be honest, there are long histories with a lot of different individuals, and I just throw that out right at the beginning because I think it's something that you got to ask yourself. Are you going to be in a place where you actually can get in a trust relationship? And if you're not capable, maybe that's not the person to lead with. Second, do you have a personal relationship with those line officers? Do you know their values, their objectives, dreams, their constraints? This is the first question I ask line officers when they say, Monte, how do I go do this? I say, well, tell me about your community and your people. Who are the leaders? Tell me about what they're looking for, what they want, why. And if they can't tell me that, they say, well, you got a lot of work to do, because you can't just go out and start having a relationship with these folks and not know anything about any of that. It starts to feel like an arranged marriage. Maybe, I don't know at that point if you do. Another thing that I think is really important is, are you inclusive? And that can mean a lot of things, but at least in the context that I'm talking about is, are you bringing something that represents the community? I've seen we only want to trim the bottom 3 feet of trees of limbs, period. Community collaborative come to the Forest Service and say, I represent everybody, so just deal with me so we can all work together and create a new vision for the forest, that there is no limbs higher than 3 or lower than 3 feet in the trees. But that doesn't represent the full breadth of the community. And today you may hear a little bit about the no-co Fireshed and how no matter what agency or group or whatever, as long as you got an interest in this, you are welcome, and it's inclusive and it brings the community together to have this conversation. It's still okay to be part of the 3-footer community collaborative. It's just that you need that larger breadth of people to be there to have a conversation with you. The last one that I'll throw in here, I think that I'd want you to think about is, are you ready to step up? As you're going to hear here, there's a lot of work here. It's a lot of work. And I have seen folks that didn't have the support of their membership or the board, or just had no interest in really doing that, but just wanted to show up to influence where things went and then kind of stand by and not add to the process. Well, I worked in DC for a few years for the Forest Service, and we called those folks lobbyists. they didn't have any resources to bring. They weren't there to help with the problem. They were just there to try to tell the Forest Service or whoever it was they were lobbying what they wanted done. And so I think another piece of this is where do you see yourself, and are you ready to step up? Because there's a whole bunch of work here. Paul, I'm going to stop there as a lead in and hand it back to you and hand it to the experts now who are actually doing all this stuff. So thanks.
Thanks, Mike. That was a great lead in. And just to explain what's going to happen for the rest of this session, we're going to hear from Maya, Hally, Chiara, myself, and Chaska. And after each one of us gives you a really high-level overview of how we've been able to succeed in our efforts with the Forest Service, we'll hopefully take a couple quick questions. They have to be quick, but I just like to break it up the talking heads a little bit and hear from some of you. Monte may chime in also quickly if he wants to amplify something that one of us said. And then we'll have some time at the end to come back to Monte and all the presenters for a broader Q&A. So I hope that gives you all ample opportunity to chime in where you might want to. And second, the more I thought about this session, the more I thought each one of these presenters today, we could do a whole session on any one of them. So this is really a high level overview of what they've been able to do. But they've all volunteered, I believe, to be a resource to you after the call. So there'll be some websites distributed with their email addresses. And if there's something you want to learn more about later on, they're available and happy to spread their knowledge and their experiences. So don't think it's all got to be accomplished here. And if Katie ever runs out of topics for calls, I suggest any one of these people on this call have an option to come back. So with that, we'll kick it off with Maya MacHamer from the Boulder Watershed Collective, and someone I've got to work with for the last few years. And she has a great story to tell about a prescribed burn that was accomplished with the Forest Service here in Boulder.
Thank you, Paul. Yes, my name is Maya MacHamer, and I'm the director for the Boulder Watershed Collective. We work in the Boulder Creek watershed, which is primarily southern Boulder County, and then a small part of Gilpin and Jefferson County. And we work in a watershed that has a history of difficult relationship with the Forest Service. After, maybe the past 7 to 10 years of mechanical treatments that have happened on Forest Service land that have been very controversial with local communities there. So we are part of the Northern Colorado Fireshed as well, and a big part of the last few years and working with the Fireshed has been building relationships across agencies and communities. And that, the opportunity to have that time building relationships with many of the people on this call today has really opened up opportunities for us to have these really strong, open relationships with many agencies, including the Forest Service, where we can have very direct conversations about what we're learning and know about the communities and what we perceive we need. And so this is what I'm going to talk about very quickly is some community engagement that we did in partnership with the Forest Service related to prescribed fire broadcast burning that was accomplished this spring. And so this was an effort that the Forest Service had been planning for many years to follow up the mechanical treatments that had happened in our watershed. And the Forest Service had not done a broadcast burn in our watershed for 20 years. So this was kind of a big deal. There had been a lot of pile burning accomplished over all of these years. And the city of Boulder and Boulder County does do broadcast burning with general support from our community, but not really at the scale that the Forest Service is trying to do in the area that's been treated. So the goal is to burn about 900 acres over the next few years. And we were really fortunate that they were able to accomplish 307 acres this spring. So the Forest Service had done some engagement like webinars with very small local communities that were close to the burn. And, when we were getting closer to the burn, we really felt like that was not adequate. That was not enough engagement for our community, and that because of the smoke that would be generated and the awareness that people have of prescribed fire now, and the fear also, even in the urban communities after the Marshall fire, we really felt like we needed more different types of engagement that could reach a broader spectrum of our community. And so we had this conversation with Monte and with our district ranger and the Boulder Ranger District. And, you know, it kind of felt like we had to be very direct about that. Like, we really feel like the engagement that has happened to this point has not been adequate. And we are nervous about having this large scale broadcast burn in our watershed without that engagement. And because we have such a great relationship now with the Forest Service, that request was taken very well. And we got right on it and we started planning some tours, some pre and post fire tours in the burn area. And so, I mean, first, I would just like to say, to be a small nonprofit and be able to have a direct conversation like that with a large federal agency, and for it to be well received as a partner is awesome. And I hope that everybody can have that type of relationship with the agencies that they work with in their areas. And so we were able to plan these prescribed fire tours. And the way that we did this, I think worked out really well. We all felt like these were very productive field trips to the burn sites. And basically the Boulder Watershed Collective did all of the planning, marketing, reaching out to the community, you know, kind of the logistics of planning. And so it really was an event that the Boulder Watershed Collective was inviting people to. And then the Forest Service was the subject matter expert. And they really designed, you know, this tour that we would go through the burn area. And they had different topics that they wanted to cover at each spot. And, you know, having these different roles really worked out well for us. We had about 35 to 45 people come to each of our pre-fire tour and our post-burn tour, and they were from really a lot of different communities. And I think we have some very dominant voices in our watershed, and so we wanted to design an engagement event where we didn't have singular voices dominating the conversation. And this is something that you can be very strategic about when you're designing engagement events. And so we had multiple stops along this tour. So there was walking and talking in between. And because it was kind of chopped up in that way, there was this opportunity for people to have one-on-one conversations between the agency personnel and the public as we were walking. And there also was opportunity to not control the conversation, but direct the conversation when there were, you know, dominant voices taking over, we could move on to the next stop. And so it ended up being very productive. There was a lot of good dialogue. There were very difficult questions that were asked, but it was very respectful. And I think overall it felt really productive. And so we hope to do, you know, we have more areas to burn, and we hope to kind of take this model that we've developed for these tours and replicate them again. And I would like to say also, this is my one little soapbox piece, that I think for many years, agencies always talk about outreach, and outreach with communities is very one directional. And it is about the agency wanting to give their information to the public. And what we were really focused on designing were engagement events where the public and the agency personnel were able to have conversations, meaningful dialogue with each other, kind of on an equal footing. And that is really where I feel like the productive conversation came from. So I'll stop there.
I like the soapbox, Maya. Thanks. That was great. We have time for a couple of questions and maybe one comment from Monte on that. If you want to add anything, Monte.
What one comment? Thank goodness you called. And I think that really illustrates kind of the difference in terms of where the mindsets are at. I had 40-something people working through the very technical difficulties of putting a fire out on a landscape where in Boulder County, it's crazy. And they felt they had done great outreach, but they're not connected to the community the same way Maya is. And that's probably one of the toughest parts of the state, is that one specific spot where that happened. And so Maya came in and swooped in and saved the day. Thank you.
Questions for Maya, or certainly you can follow up with her if you think it's going to be, if you'd rather have a longer discussion. Okay. We're moving on. Hally Strevey from the Coalition for the Poudre River Watershed in Larimer County, also part of the Arapaho-Roosevelt. And she has had some good experiences with the Forest Service too that she's going to share with us. Thank you, Hally.
Yes, thanks, Paul. So I'm going to speak to some different tools that we've been able to use with the Forest Service over really probably the past 8-ish years, and how that linked to our success with post-fire recovery after the 2020 Cameron Peak fire. And some of these tools is going to kind of link into what I think Chaska is going to cover with where we're at with the Northern Colorado Fireshed Collaborative. So CPRW has, since our beginnings back in 2012, we started after the High Park fire and Hewlett Gulch wildfires, which burned over 90,000 acres in the watershed. We really were collaborative by nature from the very beginning. And so we early on formed various different stakeholder groups, and those groups always included Forest Service representation. And so I think from the very beginning, it was like personal invites from us to get Forest Service staff there at these meetings where we're planning and prioritizing work that we wanted to do to both post-fire recovery work from the High Park fire and also wildfire mitigation work. And then I think early on, we were able to kind of build up that trust with the Forest Service and the staff at the time. And as they began planning some of their future broadcast burning, including Magic Feather, which is actually currently ongoing as we speak today, we were able to work together to leverage our capacity as this community connected partner that had time to build relationships with private landowners to start, working towards those cross-boundary treatments. And so one of the ways that one of the first steps that we took was we realized that we needed funding to be able to make those connections and to really work with those communities. And so early on, I think it was like 2017, we started went under a participating agreement with the Forest Service. And this participating agreement originally gave CPRW the capacity to spend the time that was needed to conduct this outreach with these various communities. And then that early on, we realized that was really successful method, and the Forest Service was then able to add additional funding into this participating agreement that we were able to then provide funding to other nonprofit groups, including the Boulder Watershed Collective, the Watershed Center, Big Thompson Watershed Coalition, and Estes Valley. And so all of a sudden there was more capacity for these other watershed groups doing the similar work as we were across the Arapaho-Roosevelt National Forest to extend this landscape scale work. And that method, that funding mechanism was really kind of the impetus for what started the Fireshed and where we're at today, which like I said, Chaska will speak to that. But through this agreement, we were able to accomplish a lot in collaboration with the Forest Service for this really the on the ground work that was really necessary. And that just really took the time of building those relationships with the various Forest Service staff, the district ranger with Monte, with other scientists on staff with the Forest Service. And then, of course, we then had the 2020 Cameron Peak fire. And so we still had this agreement. Early on, when the fire started, we realized that it was going to be a long road to recovery and that it was going to be a really large fire. And so CPRW was there with the Forest Service and other stakeholders and partners on a really day-to-day basis, starting to plan for what the recovery was going to look like. And then one of the ways that we were able to start work immediately after the fire was out, so spring 2021 was when work started. We were able to actually, we amended this participating agreement to allow us to streamline some of our post-fire work. So it was to allow all of the various partners, including the municipalities, CPRW and others, to actually do post-fire work on federal land, on Forest Service land, and then also a provision where we were able to do cross-boundary work on private and public land to better accomplish these post-fire goals immediately after the fire. And this this agreement, I don't know if it's like a catch-all, it probably isn't, but it worked really well for us. And it was a tool that we were able to use to really leverage our resources with the Forest Service resources and build up resources of other nonprofits, and then be able to streamline our post-fire restoration work.
Monte, what do you want to add to Hally's recap?
You know, first thing is just, it's like when you talk about a high school friend you had that you're still friends with. We have been so and trained in working with CPRW for so long. I can't imagine what it would be like without them. They were also part of the initiation of the Fireshed. You know, this personal thing is really important. That those personal relationships allowed for a very broad participating or an agreement that then had flexibility. And when stuff hit the fan, we knew that we needed to go address this work with these private landowners that were needing to treat or have some treatments on national forest above their houses, so things didn't happen. And CPRW stepped in quickly. We looked at the agreement; it would work. Here's some money. Go do wonderful things. And it sounds as easy as that, and it really was, because we knew them, we've been working with them, and not only in fires and floods where this all really started, but also in terms of the larger landscape level effort. And we've got a 240,000 something project that's just had the draft decision signed. Key part of helping develop that and making that possible. And we're burning Magic Feather today. Right now, we're not today, but have been up till today. There's still smoke up there. But again, some of the work that they've made possible through working with landowners and people in those communities.
Thanks, Monte. Thanks, Hally. Any quick questions for Hally at this point? You guys don't want to know what contract numbers that were used? You can get back to her on all those kind of things. All right. Thanks. Thank you. On behalf of the Watershed Center, because she doesn't work there anymore, Chiara Forrester is a wildfire mitigation specialist currently at the Wildfire Research Center, which is a nonprofit that seeks locally tailored pathways to create fire-adapted communities. And she really likes her new job. But before she went to her new job, she was at the Watershed Center, and they asked her to talk about NEPA on their behalf. And I have to say, Monte, maybe I have not heard of any other place in the country where NEPA was tackled in this manner. And if you have, I'd love to hear about it. So Chiara, tell them what this manner was.
Awesome. Thanks, Paul. Happy to be here to represent the amazing work of the Watershed Center and to talk about my experiences there working with the Forest Service. It's great to see lots of familiar faces. So the Watershed Center is a nonprofit that works to protect and restore watersheds from both the rivers all the way to the forest. So it's really got its start similar to CPRW in the rivers, and then kind of evolved into this forest management space that is so important to both the forests, the communities, and also the rivers. And so we are the lead coordinating entity of the St. Vrain Forest Health Partnership, which is a collaborative of over 200 different members that are working to increase the pace and scale of forest restoration in the St. Vrain watershed. And that mostly sits in Boulder County and then just peaks a little bit into Larimer. And what's going to be cool today is that, we're starting at this watershed scale, and the next call we'll talk at the Boulder County scale, and then Chaska is here at the Northern Colorado scale, which I think is really unique to our area too, is that we were able to have these kind of nested collaboratives that could all complement each other and work together. And so the partnership, the St. Vrain Forest Health Partnership, which I'll just call the partnership from now on, was really precipitated by new Joint Chiefs funding in 2020, as well as an MOU that was signed across stakeholders in Boulder County regarding wildfire risk and reducing wildfire risk. And so the structure of the St. Vrain Forest Health Partnership is having a science team. So there's a group of everyone from university researchers to managers for public lands, the conservation districts that come together, and we developed an adaptive management process or plan that Monte briefly referred to. So we collaboratively developed this adaptive management process that was basically conditions based. So looked at all these different biophysical zones and thought about how we might manage those across the watershed. And then the Forest Service was able to take that and incorporate it into their St. Vrain Forest Health Project NEPA document. Nobody ever confuses those two, project and partnership. And what was really unique and special about that time frame was that the Forest Service was incredibly open to receiving feedback and to being an equal partner at the table. So that was really critical as we came as equal partners, developed this science, and then they incorporated it in. And that helped to not only, in my opinion, improve the decision, proposed actions, but also help to do public outreach, because we were able to say, hey, this isn't just the Forest Service, this is a huge group of scientists that you know and respect, and that we've all worked together on this. And because the Forest Service manages around 65% of the watershed, their engagement helped us obtain more buy-in from our partners as well as community members, because we were really able to say, those really important people, they're here, don't worry, we're all working together on this large scale collaborative effort. We also, beyond the science side, engaged in a lot of outreach and communication. And I really like what Maya said, so I'm going to change my word from outreach to meaningful engagement, where we not only kind of did story maps, and we sent a postcard highlighting the NEPA to every single homeowner or address in the St. Vrain watershed, around 5,000 if I'm correct. But we also hosted multiple community meetings as well as webinars about the St. Vrain Forest Health Project. And one of my favorite quotes from that Monte really teed up well was that somebody came up to me after, a community member, and said, this is the first time I've actually felt listened to in this space. They were able to come to the table and say their opinions and have them received and incorporated into how we were thinking about this. So we really wanted this to be a community-driven effort. I could talk about this forever, so I'm trying to keep it to 5 minutes as per. But I also wanted to just add that having the Forest Service at the table also really helped with momentum on private lands as well. So we were able to say to private landowners, who felt like their work would be a drop in the bucket of this huge scale problem, that they were going to be part of a strategic plan. The Forest Service is implementing actions right here. You're going to be nestled in here. And so that really helped us obtain buy-in from 47 different property owners in Jamestown alone to do mitigation work on their private property. So kind of in sum, what I learned was, we want to bring multiple stakeholders to the table, think about multiple values and objectives from both fire risk to watershed health and water quality. That really helps reach a broader audience. Collaborate with the Forest Service and others on strategies and communication, have the hard conversations like Maya and Monte were both talking about. And then the Forest Service really helped us by being open to and providing opportunities for feedback, working with us as that community connected partner that has that pulse on the community and has trust with the community, and by engaging in all of our collaborative processes. Thanks.
There is a lot more to that story. And it was, I think, kind of like pulling teeth at first for the Forest Service to try this different path. Did it feel like that, Monte, or is it happening elsewhere as a result?
I would argue first that, just based off your question, Forest Service is based off an awful lot of culture. And when you've done something a certain way for 20, 30 years, it's awful hard to change. And so, yeah, maybe it was pulling teeth for folks, but I'll tell you what, I give my folks a lot of credit because they got there. Another thing I would say is, as you listen to these, you're hearing different approaches. And what Hally and her group has done up in Larimer County is very different than what Maya's doing. And I've been lucky enough to go out with Maya, and in that community, it's one of the toughest places around to work in. And so she's having to approach it from a different way. And similarly, as we got into the St. Vrain and started that talk with our community connected partner, how do we do this? that's the advice and the council we were following in terms of trying to figure out what's the best way to do this. They're signing a 100,000 acre agreement. The stuff we're looking at with Maya may be smaller until we get more community trust. It may be 2 forest supervisors from now before we get to a point that we could do a project that big up there. Who knows? But it's amazing. Last thing I'll say, because I could drone on forever, and Paul's giving me the look that I probably am. Ask Chiara about those 47 landowners, because they all said no. And somehow over a period of few months, she worked with them to get yes from each one of them, and we needed them all to say yes. And we could have never done that as an agency. If you're wondering what benefits to the Forest Service, that kind of stuff, those types of things are what these community connected partners are able to do, is they talk with their neighbors and friends about these projects and start to work through, well, how do we solve the bigger problem that's out there, which is this wildfire impact to the forest. Done talking, thanks.
Monte, we've got a little built-in time. I will definitely cut you off if necessary. Chiara, do you want to talk about the Jamestown folks real quick? We do have a couple minutes.
Yeah, it's my favorite topic, highlight of my career, I think. Yeah, so in Jamestown, which is a town that has been impacted by both flood and fire. So the 2013 flood was incredibly damaging to them. And then there was the Overland fire near them as well that caused a lot of evacuations as well as damage. You know, we basically approached it with a collaborative, with all of us coming from with different resources. So the Watershed Center was the coordinator of that project. Boulder Valley and Longmont Conservation District wrote the forest management plan, and then the St. Vrain and Left Hand Water Conservancy District were generous enough to fund the project. And so a big piece of that was that we were able to fund mitigation work within the home ignition zone for free for every landowner. So automatically that's going to help you get more buy-in from people, because this is expensive work. And then I think the big keys there in obtaining that amount of buy-in was, you know, I think this is something we all say, but relationships are everything. And so, you know, I somehow still remember everybody's dog's names and where they live. And I think like that's a big piece of this, right? Is building that trust and having folks feel like they can talk to you and feel like, you know, I had multiple people that I showed up on their property and they started crying because they really understood how important this project was for their community, but they really didn't want to cut their trees. So being able to approach that with empathy and with a science-based lens. So I'm an ecologist by training. So being able to say, hey, we've all developed this adaptive management process together across the watershed with all of these really respected and amazing scientists, like this is what we're going to use when we're thinking about your property. So whether that person, you know, their top value is their home, surviving wildfire, or a lot of people's top priority there was forest health. They wanted to be good stewards of their land. So being able, again, to kind of speak from multiple objectives, being able to say this is going to help with A, B, and C was really beneficial to obtaining that buy-in. But they're also just amazing people. And so all credit goes to them. They were very welcoming. And one of them even taught me how to use a lathe in his wood shop. So they're all awesome people. And I'm really grateful to them for being able to see that their community safety was really important.
Not that Chiara wasn't the key to success there, but she also had behind her the Fire Protection District. And
thank you. The people who did the work, thank you.
Bringing the uniformed officer along with you when you're talking about fire risk, that goes a long way. So we have the, so thanks, Chiara. If you guys don't come up with questions, I'm going to come up with some myself. So any questions right now for Chiara? All right, I'm making a list of my own. I'll spill them out later. My name's Paul Orbuch, and I'm a coordinator of the Boulder County Fireshed. And you might have gotten the impression already from Maya, maybe a little bit from Chiara, that Boulder County and the Forest Service had not had a history of friendly relations, is I guess the nice way to put it. If you know Boulder, there's a number of, anyways, you get what I'm saying. But cutting trees, and certainly the way the Forest Service did it, was not what anyone around here wanted. And there were no politicians willing to say, well, maybe this is important, until one of our county commissioners named
Deb Gardner
and Monte somehow found themselves together in Washington, D.C. and said, God, we got a lot of work we could do in Boulder County if we want to deal with the wildfire threat. And I think that was in 2019, 2018. And having a county commissioner and a forest supervisor of the same mind was the beginning of change in Boulder County. And they showed up. You know, I was working for the Washington, D.C. office of the Forest Service at that point as a contractor, got introduced to Monte. He said, oh, you live in Boulder, maybe you can help me out. And he and Deb, we had a few meetings with all the key players in the county. Monte and Deb were there at every meeting. And that makes a statement in and of itself of the political gravitas and the leadership support that they felt on this topic, and that I think transmitted to everyone in the room, saying, if the forest supervisor is going to come to Boulder and put his butt in the chair for 2 hours, that is a great signal. After not even a year, we had a draft MOU. We circulated it around. We didn't get into a lot of detail on it. We talked about a vision. We talked about letting the lead from the ground up with our watershed partners, who you've just met, Chiara and Maya. They basically were really lucky in that they want the Watershed Center covers the northern part of Boulder County, and the Watershed Collective covers the southern part, and we're covered. So we had these two watershed groups with perfect geographic unity, and we were able to sign an MOU with the Forest Service on one of their forms. That it wasn't easy to navigate, but we made it official, and signed it on August 13th, 2020, the day the Cameron Peak fire started. We were at our signing ceremony up near Netherland, and suddenly everyone's phones going off, and all these fire guys start leaving. And if you got in the right spot, you could see this small smoke plume out to the north. So that was, we were ahead of it for a change, as opposed to responding. And that MOU, I think, has led to a lot of lowering the temperature in the county. The vocal minority that used to be, everyone used to kind of listen to, they're not as vocal anymore. And I think there's more of a vocal majority now to do active management and to let the collaboratives lead us. So it's not the Forest Service imposing their way. A couple of our accomplishments, other than what you've heard, I think, were we helped unofficially in our off hours pass a tax initiative in the county last November. That is $11 million a year, a sales tax. You pay 10 cents on every $100 you spend in the county now. And that goes to the county for wildfire mitigation and for home hardening in the plains and up in the mountains. And that money, interestingly, what they did, the first thing Boulder County did with that money was support the collaboratives and capacity, understanding that you can't just go out and fund projects. You need the people on the ground to build the support, explain to people, and lead out on getting work done. And so the county has embraced that model and they're putting their money where their mouth is, which is great. We were able to pivot in the Fireshed a little bit to respond to the Marshall Fire, which we were really proud to have in our county. 1,000 homes, an incredible wake-up call the hard way for everybody. And I think it's that, maybe more than anything, is what's changed the attitude in this county and hopefully elsewhere. But we have formed a grasslands working group. We put out a document that we think talks about management efforts, because people are struggling right now with what to do about the grasslands. And we're trying to build a bit more collaborative approach so that one municipality isn't saying something different from the county. They're all on the same page with whether you're supposed to mow, graze, leave them alone, spray them. And people are really concerned, especially if they're rebuilding their house in the exact same spot it was before. And we're going to maybe pivot to take on biomass, everyone's favorite topic, but there are some solutions out there. And I think we have an opportunity to maybe elevate some of those. So maybe I'll be able to report on that topic one of these days to this group. But that's my spiel on the Boulder County Fireshed. The draft, our agreement is up online. You'll get a copy, the link to that, and I'm happy to talk about it with anyone in the future. But you can't lose when you have a forest supervisor who's there, and when you have watershed groups that are as committed and as professional as the ones we have in Boulder County, and the county commissioners are showing. We had Deb Gardner at first. Then we ended up with this guy, Matt Jones, who was a firefighter and was in the state legislature, and he ran with this too. So it's been good so far, and I hope the hits keep coming. I thought I saw one question in the chat, and it said, could you restate the county funding mechanism for the collaborative? Tom, I'm glad you asked. I can restate. Boulder County Ballot Initiative 1A was passed last November with like 68% of the vote or something. There was no organized opposition. You can find information about it in the news, but it was not to support the collaborative. It was so Boulder County could have $11 million a year to use how it saw fit to do wildfire mitigation, period. What they have done with it so far, though, is they have supported the Boulder Watershed Collective and the Watershed Center with some capacity money for, I think, a 5-year period. So they can hire people, and it's not something they're fighting about getting more money a year from now to keep those people. So it's building up their capacity. And I think what they're moving on to now is supporting with that money Wildfire Partners, which is a program in the county to help people harden their homes. And also they're trying to figure out how could we start maybe spending some of this money on actually forest health treatments. That's a lot more complicated, and it's probably going to involve grant money to the watershed groups, but that's something they ultimately want to do. Did that do the trick, Tom?
Yes, it did. Thank you.
You're welcome. Happy to talk more about that, but you can find more information on the interweb. Any other questions? And if not, we're going to go to the biggest landscape effort we got out there. And this is from Chaska Huayhuaca with the Colorado Forest Restoration Institute, who was instrumental in helping to develop the framework that is the Northern Colorado Fireshed Collaborative, which is basically the entire forest of the Arapaho-Roosevelt and all the surrounding counties that are part of that. And if you want to talk large landscapes, talk to Chaska. Go ahead, Chaska. Thank you.
Just a little cog in this large landscape wheel. I'm a program manager at the Colorado Forest Restoration Institute, or CFRI, and I've been involved with the Northern Colorado Fireshed Collaborative in several different roles since 2020, including at one point the coordinator. I believe our current coordinator is with us on the call as well. And most recently, I am on the investment committee. So the Northern Colorado Fireshed is an all lands, large landscape collaborative that got started, as Hally mentioned, in 2017, with a mission to increase the scale and pace of forest restoration by bringing fire back into the watershed management toolbox. And that initial seed of collaboration grew from the Arapaho-Roosevelt National Forest, Pawnee National Grassland, ARP, recognizing that they were going to need partners in order to achieve outcomes in strategically impactful locations at the scale that they needed to meet the challenge of wildfire. So they started by developing agreements, as you heard, with CPRW, for example, but also with the Colorado Forest Restoration Institute and Rocky Mountain Research Station, to start kind of like getting some of people's time to start developing shared vision, shared goals, and that shared strategy. So over time, the Fireshed has now grown to run the length of the ARP. It started kind of concentrated in Larimer County, and it's now I-70 up to the Wyoming border and over onto the west slope. It consists of multiple federal and state agencies, local government, elected officials, and as you've heard, several community-connected, place-based partners, coalitions, collaboratives, and so forth. So we're really like a meta collaborative. So we had an increasing number of partners incorporating the vision of the Fireshed into their work, doing that meaningful community engagement to build social consent, and coordinating the doers to develop cross-boundary projects. And that was, that takes a lot of work and puts strain on the ARP's ability to keep up with all those partner agreements. So when we learned that our landscape would be a part of the wildfire crisis strategies front range priority landscape, we recognized that we needed to develop a more formal structure, and we needed to develop a more streamlined approach to distributing resources to partners. So the ARP initiated the process by partnering with the National Forest Foundation, or NFF, through a master participating agreement to establish the Northern Colorado Fireshed Fund to support the activities of our partners. So through that agreement, NFF became the fiduciary of the fund, and that was seeded with, but not limited to funds from the bipartisan infrastructure law. So the arrangement with NFF was a real game changer because they're able to aggregate and distribute resources with a lot more flexibility and efficiency, and just frankly faster than what the Forest Service could do. So it kind of took a strain off of them. So meanwhile, the Fireshed Steering Committee was standing up a new investment committee to make recommendations to the NFF for fund investments based on proposals received from our partners. And the fund can support partner capacity or on the ground projects. And that's key because we have a lot of partners at different stages or different levels of capacity. And so many of our partners need to kind of build up that capacity in order to do that important community engagement work, or to get to the point where they can partner to implement projects at scale. So another piece of the puzzle then was developing a funding model for transparent and equitable allocation of funds that kind of sets out benchmarks of success across these stages of collaborative readiness. And that framework emerged from brainstorms involving Monte and others from the ARP and from Colorado Forest Restoration Institute and other partners around the NOCO Fireshed. And it's now been incorporated into the Fireshed's charter. So we test drove all this, the charter, the fund, the investment committee, and the collaborative readiness framework just this spring with our first round of capacity funding. So we learned some lessons and we have some ideas for how to do it better in the next round, but all in all, it went pretty smoothly. And we announced the first 6 awardees in June and anticipate having enough for a second mini round of capacity grants before the end of the year. And then the investment committee is aiming to begin funding projects by next spring. And the criteria for project funding are in development currently in the committees. So throughout the evolution of the NOCO Fireshed, ARP has managed, I think, to strike a really good balance of being a kind of visionary and supportive partner, but also maintaining a pretty light touch. They send representatives at different levels, not just higher level, but people like boots on the ground folks to meetings for all the committees. They always show up and share information when asked. They have a really responsive partnership coordinator who responds to emails in a timely manner. It's amazing. And also incredibly helpful public information officers that just really help us out with the kind of strategizing around communities and communication and messaging. And so they've given the partners, as you've heard, resources, but more importantly, they've given us that decision space to really come up with the collaborative structures and the processes to co-develop strategies to achieve our shared goals. So I really focus just on the fund here, and I'm happy to answer other questions about other aspects of the NOCO Fireshed, but also we have a couple of folks from NFF here if you have questions about the specifics of the fund, as well as Karina Marshall, our current coordinator. So thank you.
All right, we're going to go back to each of you for 5 more minutes each. Now, that was great. Thank you. I hope everyone who wasn't familiar with what's going on up here has a little bit more familiarity, has some resources to reach out to. I mean, we're really proud of this evolution that we've had up here in the last 3-4 years, and these structures we put in place, and this funding we're now have access to, and these accomplishments on the ground that we're trying to achieve every day. And we're happy to share how it was done. And thank you for listening. I'm going to turn it back over to Katie and Monte, and we're all still here for questions for another 30 minutes if you got them. And as I said, I got a few if you don't. Thanks, Katie.
Awesome. Well, I don't know if you need to turn it over to me. I think we would love to hear a couple closing thoughts from Monte.
One thing that I'd add, and it's 5 minutes is so hard to describe so many of the different things that you've heard today. But one thing is you've heard this whole plethora of different collaboratives. It's almost like 5 kittens in a bag that are all just kind of rolling around. Hard to make sense sometimes of the order of this, but the Northern Colorado Fireshed, it's that umbrella organization. It's supporting everybody else. It's bringing the science in. There's larger planning teams, this funding stuff, working with NFF to not only bring some Forest Service funding, but who else out there? Coca-Cola, who knows? We'll see how this works out. But the Fireshed at the forest level is really important. Technical standards. For example, we had some issues around pile burning this year and publics being scared because they saw flames. That fits into our ops committee and other parts of the Northern Colorado. How do we relieve that perceived risk? The real one isn't there. It wasn't going anywhere, wouldn't have gone anywhere, couldn't have gone anywhere, but the perceived risk was horrible. People were calling 911 and things. So Northern Colorado Fireshed, amazing. You come down to Boulder, and that place is so crazy with so many different people and so many things and so many entities. The Boulder Fireshed that evolved there is not in place of the larger Fireshed. It just was an intermediate one that needed to manage all of that's going on in Boulder. And then you've got all these place-based collaboratives, that these community connected partners that are in these different spots. And the folks there in left hand in St. Vrain know the Watershed Center, but you get down in Nederland and it's the Watershed Collective, and you're up in Boulder County and they live and know the people up there. And so as you're listening to all these, there really is a hierarchy of how they all relate, and there's a lot to it, and it's hard for me to attend every meeting, etc. But through the Fireshed, we bring everybody together, and so it's a piece that I just wanted to add on to some of that discussion, because sometimes people ask me, well, what is all that stuff? Well, there you go. That's what it is. It is all different. If you look at what's going on in Nederland, it's not what CPRW and Hally are doing up in Larimer County. And I think the lesson from that is I wouldn't look to us as a template for this is what you need to do in your community. But there's a lot here, and I think there are some principles around some of the work. Chaska kind of alluded to some of that, what we call stages of readiness, and thoughts around how you progress from, hey, I'm just starting to, now I'm working with the Forest Service and we're doing thousands and thousands of acres a year. There's a progression on how you think and work through that, but the tactics and how you do it and who you interact with or work with in any given community is going to be different. Because if you're on the San Juan and doing this, it's going to look that those are different communities, people, money, educational structures, whatever else. And so a piece of this is it's very flexible and it doesn't have to be rigid or a prescribed formula. I'll stop there.
Awesome. Thanks, Monte. We have a couple of questions in the chat that I'll ask, and then I also have a couple built up as well as Paul. So the first question is for Chiara. Could you speak briefly about how the process looked for funding all of the private properties for mitigation and restoration work? She also says that's the dream goal.
It was the dream. It did feel a bit like, okay, this is the one and only time this is going to happen. Like, let's be really excited about it. So yeah, the St. Vrain and Left Hand Water Conservancy District was the funder of this project. So, you know, when we were doing our outreach for the St. Vrain Forest Health Partnership, we were getting a lot of interest from individual landowners asking about doing work on their private lands and how we could support them. And one landowner, Alan Mueller, his spark plug in his community, had been trying to rally his neighbors to do mitigation work. And he had gotten about 7 property owners all around him to agree to do mitigation work. But they were, you know, he was trying to fund it. He was applying for grants as a, you know, during his spare time to try to get this work funded, and was hitting a wall. And so we were able to bring this project to the St. Vrain Left Hand Water Conservancy District as a catcher's mitt idea in collaboration with the Left Hand Fire Protection District. So they said, we need this, that's what we're calling it, catcher's mitt, this area, a strategic area of mitigation done. on the west side that would help to create more space for wildfire fighters to fight that. And I'm leading into all of this because that, district has not historically funded forest mitigation projects. So all of this was really important context to set up for them when bringing this project. And as part of that catcher's mitt, the Forest Service had conducted mitigation work over multiple years. Somebody, Kevin, the person who had put them in, called them spaghetti. They were little fingers that came down one of the slopes next to Jamestown, and we were able to fit our treatment into that. And so bringing that whole strategic plan to the Conservancy District, and also being able to say, the Forest Service is engaged, they're doing a NEPA planning effort right now. So this is going to complement that and help to increase the efficacy of the Forest Service treatments next to these private properties. And then they had taxpayer dollars. So they had passed a mill levy. I don't remember which year that was passed in, but they passed a mill levy where voters in their district said, we're willing to raise our taxes to fund water quality improvement projects. And because fire is so connected to water quality, the board of the Conservancy District felt that it was a great project to invest in, because it's not only putting taxpayer dollars back into the community that paid those taxpayer dollars, but also protecting water resources in the future.
Awesome, thank you.
Katie, can I just tag one more thing onto what Chiara said?
Certainly.
I think for Janae, we've also had success working with water districts or municipal water providers to use that funding to match state and federal grants for work on private lands. So I see Evelyn Rhodes on here from Arvada Water. They have supported some of our projects, as well as Denver Water and City of Boulder Water. So I think that is a good mechanism for work on private land to really elevate the work that's happening on federal land, working with water providers who have similar goals that we all do.
Cool. There's also a question from Tom. I think this one's for Chaska. I would like to gain more information on the investment fund, including structure and the defining of anticipated outcomes, along with the degree of quantification of the quote return on investment.
Sure. Yeah, thanks for that question, Tom. This could be lengthy, and I'd be happy to connect with you offline to give you a little bit more information. But so this first round, as I mentioned, was for capacity funding. And so we incorporated that collaborative readiness framework that Monte was talking about, in which I will be able to share the official report with Katie as soon as our layout and formatting person gets back from vacation and puts the finishing touches on it. That will be available very soon. But essentially, that framework provides kind of key benchmarks at each of 4 stages, starting with, kind of early stage collaboration, where you're just bringing partners around a shared vision. Then you're moving into developing strategies together, a spatial strategy, a kind of operation, like cross-boundary operation strategy, community engagement strategies, and so forth, as well as your adaptive management strategy. Then you move into the 3rd stage, where you're sort of rolling out some pilot projects. You're really kind of building trust between implementers, and then moving into a more kind of mature collaborative stage. Long term, you're really starting to like build in learning loops and so forth. So the framework has specific benchmarks, and we incorporated this into our like the kind of call for proposals document, and asked the groups that were applying to kind of talk about where they are in terms of their readiness, and how the additional funding would help them get to the next level. And so we have, these are not like hard and fast quantified measures, but it's a framework that provides enough flexibility for the different kinds of groups, because not all these coalitions are quite the same. We've got some kind of nonprofits that are more kind of traditional nonprofit, like we've got conservation districts, like we have a fairly broad definition that we're using here, and we're applying the framework too. But that's kind of how we will be tracking how the investments are actually paying off on the capacity side. I think for the project side, like I said, we're in the process of developing those criteria. We had some draft criteria, but we're vetting those, and we really want to make sure that that is a strong vetting process to make sure that they're not only robust for a project selection, but they connect to the kind of desired outcomes that we want to see, and that we can also, on the other side of it, monitor our progress towards the outcomes that we want to see on the landscape. So stay tuned for what that ends up finally looking like. But like I said, as far as structure goes, I'd be happy to answer more questions about that offline.
Awesome. Thanks, Chaska. Monte, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah. Chaska nailed it. When we started talking about trying to how do we fund collaboratives, how do we fund work that's not on national forest, a lot of conversations there, a lot of legalities you got to be careful around. From the capacity part of the collaboratives, that's a no-brainer, and that was the agency's preferences. Let's make sure we've got the collaboratives taken care of in terms of the money to be able to operate and hire the people they need first, and then let's start talking about project-based type of work. So that was a piece of what Chaska was talking about there. Another piece then was the Wyden Act is what allows us to put federal money on a private ground and do that. And basically what it says is that work has got to be to the benefit of the national forest at its most simple definition. And so the way we've defined that is we have been building strategies with these different collaboratives. And so if you're looking for work in that's on the ground, not the capacity part, but the actual project part, then it's got to be tied to those strategies, because those strategies are identified as going to benefit the national forest, even if it's not on national forest. And it's a really important thing. Another thing that I'd point out with the NFF connection here, and folks jump on from NFF if you feel you need to correct all my errors, but bottom line is, when we give that money to NFF, we've entered into agreement with them. We want you to achieve certain things, but within that, at that point, it's NFF's money and not mine. So the NFF has said, we'll be so gracious as to allow the Northern Colorado Fireshed to give us advice as to how to spend this wad of money that's here to, and so it's still their final decision. It's not a vote. There's no popular vote here. It is all NFF's. It's not my decision now. I've already given it to NFF and said, good luck, help these communities thrive. But I wanted to share that with you as well, because it's working wonderfully. It skirts some of that kind of law and policy stuff in some ways for us, and yet we still are allowing the Northern Colorado Fireshed to have an ability to influence where that money goes by advising and giving recommendations to NFF. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, I would just say I don't really have anything to add from the NFF perspective to that, Monte. I think that that's really true. I think that we definitely are deferring to the expertise in the group of the Fireshed, and are really just here to help get things done in an efficient manner. So I think that was well said.
Cool. Thanks, Monte and Shayna. Does anyone else have any questions? I know Paul said that he had several, but I want to give others a chance first. All right, go ahead, Paul. What you got for us?
Monte, everyone wants to work more closely with the Forest Service at some point, who's in this watershed protection business. You got to in Colorado, because you guys manage much of our critical watersheds. How do they get the attention of the Forest Service if they're not quite as outgoing as you are? I mean, how would you advise a collaborative to position themselves, message such that their forest supervisor gives them more time than they might be at present?
Sure. You know, that's a great question. It's a tough question. I think a couple of things. First and foremost, to recognize each person is different, and if you get a new forest supervisor into a place, everybody's coming in there to tell them, here's what you need to do, here's how you need to spend your money, here's who you need to work with. Don't listen to those people, etc. The federal system is not set up to be friends like this. It allows it, and it's possible, but there's also lots of pitfalls along the way, depending on how. For example, if everyone isn't welcome to the Fireshed meeting, then I could get into FACA violations pretty quickly in terms of seeking advice from a specific group about how to manage my forest. It'd be no different than if it was the timber industry or just a bunch of environmentalists that aren't interested in any treatments and then coming to me. And so there's pieces of the makeup, there's the timing, there's all these things. So just recognize, you all out there that are doing the collaborative stuff, this isn't easy for us on our end. I think the second thing I'd say is, where are we at, Chaska? You came in at, I think, year 3 or so, but I think we're about 7 years into this now. And so we've made a lot of mistakes. We've done a lot of things right. We've reversed step and slid down a little bit. We've gotten back up. I would say next is don't get frustrated. Keep plowing ahead. You're going to get there. And it's going to take a while. You just don't go from 0 to 60. I've never seen anywhere where everybody's just gets together one day and the next day they're laying out a 100,000 acre or 200,000 acre planting unit together. So what is it that's at the core? And I mentioned a few of those things right in my little speech at the beginning, just so I could get them in. But first, you got personal relationships with these folks. Can you tell me that you know what that forest supervisor is dreaming about and aspiring to? Do you know what the pressures are that's on them? If you don't, you probably don't know them well enough to enter in a relationship with them. If you want an arranged marriage, that's fine. But if you're looking for true long-lasting romance, then you've got to go out and spend the time, coffee, field trips, being theoretical. Another piece of this that I think forest soups shy away quickly from is when too focused of a group shows up that doesn't really represent the community. And if they can see that you represent or have the ability to bring in the community as a whole to be able to work and advise, then you're going to see folks a lot more interested in that. But like I say, I mean, I made that up. The let's cut all the limbs from 0 to 3 foot tall on a tree club. If you show up and representing yourself as the whole community, they're going to see right through that. And so you all have to think and look at your own organizations and say, am I inclusive? Are there other people that need to be a part of this? Do we need to gather actually a group of folks and such and start to convene and have a conversation around this, rather than my group that's had a strong mission for 20 years and done this, and this is our lane. You can hear what I'm talking about in there. That piece about really opening the door to the community is what's so powerful here. Not just hearing from CFRI or not just hearing from the fire chief's perspectives or whatever it may be. This is about bringing people together to work together in really the Knights of the Round Table fashion. We don't have a big long table with the Forest Service at one end and somebody else at the other. This is a round table of equality where we sit and talk and work through these issues. So I think that's another big deal. I believe, just as another added thing, is we've got to get to strategy, real strategy. What are you doing and how does that create an outcome? And I see a lot of people really start to convene when the first time they see a strategy presented that they can see that a difference is going to be made. It really does reach out and attract people. A lot of times, though, what I see folks bringing to the table is more random acts of restoration. I'm here to work on this 5 acres and this 5 acres, and can't you burn the piles that I've just created? Or how can you... You've got to be thinking at a larger scale, and you got to be asking and talking about that. And how do we together create something that's going to make a difference in these communities? And so I think that's an important thing, is that you got to relook at your approaches if you've been struggling and say, what are you asking for? And really, what are you proposing to the agency? So The last piece of this, which I mentioned, but I'm sincere in this as well. I've seen some really great organizations, national organizations, the local entity of national organizations that are more than willing to come and tell me what to do. That no problem. They're here to advise me to how to spend my money and what to work on, but are not able in any way, shape, or form ever to help. And that's probably not, that's an organization that belongs at the round table for shores. But if that's the organization and the only group there, I'm not looking to them to do much. And I've got a couple of those where they've come to us and say, we want to be in charge of all this, but we don't want to really do anything. And we've never really done anything with you. And I'm like, I'm not interested. You've had many opportunities. I need to see somebody that's as excited and as enthusiastic as I am, because we don't have a lot of time. And I don't have a lot of interest in going back to the old models of let's just sit around and talk about it and not get anything done. And I think in Northern Colorado, a lot's happening and a lot's getting done. And it's going to be amazing to see what happens over the next 5 to 10 years. But is your organization ready? Because it's going to be tough and hard. So there's a couple of thoughts, Paul. I hope that helps.
That was a pretty good answer. Just a couple of things. When you say, how do you demonstrate you're representing the community? I think elected officials are technically supposed to represent their community. So if a collaborative can align their vision with county commissioner, go see the forest supervisor. I think the forest supervisors pay attention in those kind of instances. And the other thing that you mentioned, FACA, and the feds always throw that out when they don't want to talk. Wrong. Don't let them do that. If the collaborative's hosting the meeting, there's no FACA issue at all. The Forest Service should show up. So don't ever let them throw that one at you. And if they do, say, all right, we'll host the meeting and issue the invites. And you're just like anyone else coming to our meeting. And that's not a Federal Advisory Committee Act violation. So, and I went to law school too, so I know that.
Let me add one thing to what you just said. You know, if you think about a situation, and I worked with a group when I was in legislative affairs in DC for the Forest Service that in northern Idaho that was struggling, and the problem is that this forest advisory group, as it were, was really heavily stacked just with industry people, and didn't represent the larger body, didn't represent the larger views of the community. They represent the subset, but not the larger views. And that's what I say when I say about being inclusive, is that think about who you are and what you represent. And when you come to the Forest Service, are you walking in the door with some of these other people? Are you just there for the 3-footer club, or are you there with industry, environmentalists, or whatever? What is that larger breadth of what that community is that's there? And are you guys, because that's the part of the Fireshed that's so amazing, is that folks have been able to say, I can come together and I can work together regardless of my background on this to make this larger vision come true. And so there may be some work that has to be done before you go knock on the door of the Forest Service. If they're not knocking and looking for you yet, maybe that's some of the things that you've got to ask and think about and start to pull together before you go knock on the door. So just a couple thoughts there.
I'm done, Katie. Monte is kind of done for now, but there's time for more questions.
Yeah, I was actually wondering if maybe we could flip kind of a similar question over to our other speakers. One of the things we were really wanting to make sure in this meeting, we wanted to make sure we didn't just walk away thinking, well, it's all about personalities. And so Monte, that was really good to hear those kind of more concrete things from the Forest Service's perspective of what people can actually think through and do better. So I'm wondering for the other speakers, if there were any challenges or roadblocks that you can remember from your perspectives. If you can have it specifically relating to working with the Forest Service, but then if you can think of what you did to kind of work through those, or if there's a piece of advice that you would give to someone else in a similar situation.
I can jump in. I would say one thing that we have tried, you know, the scale that the Forest Service works at is very intimidating sometimes for a tiny nonprofit. I mean, we have We have 3 part-time people and 1 full-time person, which is often bigger than other collaboratives. So we work at a much smaller scale. And so we have really piloted some of our methods of community engagement and developing and implementing forestry projects at a very small scale. You know, we really started with a community of 200 people in the watershed, you know, because it's easier to work with small communities and develop projects on a smaller scale. And so, and you know, in the beginning, I think I felt like, ooh, this is never going to work. We're just too small. But we've been able to take that model and all of those things that we've learned and are now applying them in larger communities and tweaking them to scale up. And so that's kind of the approach that we're taking. And that feels like it's a good, I mean, that has been one way that I feel like we've been successful in demonstrating success with communities and with our partners.
I can speak to this question as well, because it is really important, right? There's going to be people that are not going to like what you're doing. And one of our approaches was making sure that we supported their engagement just in the NEPA process specifically, just as much as we supported the people who are really supportive of the NEPA process. So really making it clear from the St. Vrain Forest Health Partnership and Watershed Center perspective that we don't only want to hear from the people that love this and want us to cut all the trees above 3 feet. We wanted to involve every single person, and we provided questions that they should answer when commenting on the NEPA, rather than, you know, ideas for statements in support of the NEPA. So I think that really helped increase trust that we were actually trying to hear from lots of different people, not just the people that love us, which is everyone, of course. But we also, I already spoke to this a little bit, so I'll keep it really short, but the science team aspect of it and being able to speak from with a data-driven approach, be able to synthesize peer-reviewed literature and bring that to the table, rather than, you know, saying, we promise this will work. Really bringing evidence to the table helped get a lot of folks in Boulder County on board, especially in a community that really cares about the ecology. And just acknowledging that they care about the ecology, or they care about water quality, or they care about homes and life safety first before telling them, you know, well, we don't like your idea. Really acknowledging, I know you're at this table because you really care, and that is incredible. And thank you for being here. This is my perspective, and just really being transparent that we want to hear people who disagree with us.
Yeah, and I think that, Chiara, that making sure you've got that venue for those dissenting voices and a way for them to plug in will be important down the road when, you know, because there's been a lot of challenges to these conditions-based NEPA projects. So I feel like St. Vrain Forest Health Partnership did a lot to really build a robust foundation for that conversation, as did, you know, Boulder Watershed Collective with your field trips. Like, you've just done a really stellar job with community engagement. So look forward to seeing how it plays out and pays off down the road.
I wanted to just throw in a recent success story that we've had with working with the Forest Service and with private landowners. We recently, before the magic feather burning began again this year, so it was earlier this spring, we helped organize a prescribed fire tour that was open to local landowners, so similar as what Boulder Watershed Collective has done. And we had, I think, 40 different people there from the community. We also had some representation from CBS, so local news was there. And one of the landowners there was actually interviewed by CBS. And this person has been in the past really skeptical of prescribed fire and has been very worried and nervous about it, and has made her voice known about that to us and to others in the community. And I think her being able to show up and listen to, you know, all the extensive planning that went into this process, into the burn and plan, and, you know, how they decide that they're going to burn each day, and actually seeing where they were going to do it, really helped alleviate some of her concerns. And then in the interview, she mentioned, that she was supportive of the project, to the CBS person. And so I think that was, I think it's just a really huge win of how this collaboration across private and public land and with the Forest Service and making sure all the right people are there and that the community is there. It's just, it was a really good success story, I think.
Janae, you've got a hand up. And Hally, I love that story. It gives me warm fuzzies.
Yeah, hi everyone. I just wanted to ask a question kind of following up on this dialogue that's going on. So kind of to tie into what you were saying, Monte and Chaska and Hally and Chiara, or I'm sorry, Chiara, sorry. When, one of the things that I find personally challenging is, especially in Colorado, there are so many people with so much experience and knowledge in a wide range of, for everything from fire science to land management. So when you're engaging with some of the residents and you do encounter people who really are coming with a breadth of knowledge that does not agree with maybe your strategies and tactics, I'd love to hear your strategies and tactics for how you respond to those types of engagements and interactions.
I love this question because it was definitely something we came across a lot. Was we have a really highly educated community, and that is a treasure, right? Like that's incredible, and we have a lot of people that care. But it also caused hard conversations, and I think being able to say that we have an adaptive management process, and that is the foremost way that we're going to think about these discrepancies, is that we're taking all of the information that we can, saying thank you to them for bringing this alternative perspective and this additional information that they have from their perspective and their experience. And then that all gets incorporated into an adaptive management plan where we reassess later. So this is not a one and done. We're not going in and doing this and being like, cool, we don't even know if that worked. We didn't monitor anything. Who knows? Hopefully it did. We're being able to say, we're going to test the water quality. We're going to test understory diversity of the plant community to see how this forest treatment affected that. And then all of that information will be incorporated back into future planning efforts. So to me, it was really helpful to be able to speak to that iterative process, as well as, speak about the trade-offs of different approaches. There's not going to be a perfect thing to do. And in some places, we're going to prioritize homes, and in some communities or areas, we're going to prioritize ecology.
There's also an element, I think, of recognizing where there's shared values with these folks that are coming. They're bringing, robust scientific papers, but perhaps from other regions or places that have different kind of ecological circumstances and so forth. And there's always going to be that nugget of truth there, right? And so to get into it on scientific grounds can be really maybe not the best use of a group's time. So I think just continuing to have the conversation, have a robust adaptive management process, as Chiara said, is maybe one of the best approaches. And CFRI is in the process of developing some tools, and I think other groups have already developed some tools for collaborative groups and community connected partners to use in those circumstances. So happy to follow up with that.
Awesome. Thanks, Chiara and Chaska. I didn't mean to distract you by putting in the chat, but this did kind of make me think of next month's branching out, which is going to focus on the nuggets of truth. Not that there's always, selective science being used, but in cases where it is, this is the branching out for you is next month. So yeah, I don't want to cut us off, but it is 3 o'clock. So I want to be sure to let everyone go on time. I really appreciate all of our speakers taking the time today. Monte, Maya, Hally, Chiara, Paul, and Chaska, thank you so much. If you guys want to follow up with any of the speakers, I'll be sending a follow-up email with a recording and email addresses, and then any links that our speakers have determined that they would like to share with you all. So thanks so much. And I hope everybody has a wonderful Friday and a great weekend. Thursday.